Hello, a very warm afternoon to all of you, and welcome to Unacademy. Welcome to today's The Hindu newspaper analysis. We take a look at the Delhi edition of today's The Hindu newspaper, analyze the articles for their relevance in the mains and the prelims examination, and also take some of the articles from your PIB. So, overall, today we are going to have a discussion for around 11 different topics, five of them in slightly greater detail associated with the mains examination, and also one of them because it is in editorial section. Four of them for their relevance in the prelims. So, first of all, holding the court accountable amid democratic strain. Now, this is about the accountability of the judiciary in itself. While it does not address a substantial amount of a background of judicial accountability, but nonetheless, we will cover what the article is telling us about. So, this is relevant for a GS paper 2. The right path for India's nuclear power development. Now, this is a very nice article. This talks about the importance of indigenous nuclear reactors to be produced, and so that in the future, a true sense of Atmanirbharta can happen, and why the some of the government initiatives in this line do not fit with what is going on in the development across the country. This is relevant for your GS paper 3. Can biogas aid India's energy security? In the times that we are in, where you have a substantial polarizing discussion around ethanol, E20, etc., this article delves into biogas, the government initiatives for biogas, and also talks about the example of such kind of initiatives on food grains. Here we will also be touching upon the case of the ethanol blending that we have experienced and the outcomes of that. So this is again relevant for your GS paper 3. What is the India Australia uranium supplies agreement? Now, this has been cited as a landmark agreement between India and Australia. So, what is it? You would know the details of it. We will have a quick brush around of this again. So, this is relevant for your GS paper too. For Iran, Hormuz is the key to deterrence and dominance in the Persian Gulf. Now, the war has again started. And this is where Iran has again held Hormuz to ransom. And because we have such an interesting precedent in the White House, he says that Hormuz is basically held hostage to the US. So, why is it that Iran wants to reassert its control over the region of Hormuz and the Strait of Hormuz? This is relevant for your GS paper too, has appeared in the editorial section. Now, other than that, retail inflation climbs past the RBI target of 4.4%. And which are the sectors which are leading that retail inflation? India Japan review defense ties and the uh, upcoming 2 plus 2 talks that are going to happen. All Ladakh districts to get autonomous hill councils, and trade deficit jumps fourfold. Along with that, a couple of PIB articles is what we are going to be discussing. Now, here, before we start the discussion, a couple of announcements for all of you. We have come up with the lowest ever price of 16,999 plus double validity. And this is a once a time opportunity whereby you get the chance to prepare for the examination with the best faculty out there, and along with that, you basically have the monthly plan as well. So this is where you can use the code IES English and avail the maximum possible discount. This offer ends on 16th of July, and this is not going to return. So do utilize this. Now, having said that, another announcement today, we are initiating or we are beginning an initiative for all the beginners, all the candidates who have been preparing for civil services. We are coming up with the complete NCERT series. So 7 p.m., join us live at Unacademy YouTube channel and Unacademy IS English YouTube channel. The link is provided in the description below. What we are going to do is we are going to cover every day, 5 days a week, NCERT, fundamentals of physical geography in detail from zero to proficiency. And along with the discussion of the PYQs, we will take a look at them as well. We will ensure that in a limited time span, your entire coverage of NCERT geography is done. So be regular in this, and within a manner of 2 to 3 weeks, become proficient in geography. That is guaranteed. So we are going to go live at 7 p.m., 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. And on Saturday, we are going to have a special test discussion. And that is a link we will be providing to you on Friday. And that again will be free of cost. Now, starting with the first article of the day, holding the court accountable amid democratic strain is an article relevant for your GS paper too. Now, here basically, what is this article talking about? First of all, let me give you a broader context so that you understand the nuances of it. The article broadly refers to the court's actions or rather inactions when it comes to the SIR activities or the SIR exercise which is being carried out by the Election Commission of India. Now, what is that SIR? SIR is Special Intensive Revision, SIR, right? Special Intensive Revision of the electoral rules, which is being carried out by the Election Commission of India. Now, why does the Election Commission of India carry out this special intensive revision? It is generally carried out in order to weed out the voters basically who, let's suppose, have migrated, have died, or let's suppose include newer voters who have attained the voting age, who were not in the voting age as per the previous election. So it is a kind of a think about it, sanitization of the electoral rolls, which is done periodically. And that is something which India has experienced multiple times in the past, starting from the 50s onwards. So, this SIR process has been a part of our electoral democratic process. But then, in the past couple of years, what has been the experience of the SIR? The documentation which is asked out of the voters, the limited time window that the voters have to comply with in order to get the SIR process finalized, the cumbersome process of submission of those documents, all of those have made the entire exercise very cumbersome. As a consequence, many of the voters, lakhs of voters, have been excluded from the list. Now, yes, once you are excluded from the list, you always have the option to file an appeal in a tribunal, provide and submit your documents, providing the proof of your citizenship, and then maybe you will be included once again in the electoral roll. But the entire process is so tough and so lengthy that oftentimes it disenfranchises even your genuine voters. For example, let me cite an example. For example, right now, SIR exercises are being carried out in Karnataka. Now, as a part of that SIR form, you have two columns which are required to be filled in that form, which asks about your father's or your grandfather's electoral roll and the detail in 2002. Now think about it. Ideally, from the side of Election Commission of India, they can argue that yes, that is a genuine proof of your citizenship, that you have been a part of or you have been voting since past couple of decades or so on. But think about the number of population in whose case the parents or the grandparents might not have survived. So where do they get that electoral data? Now, if you go to the Election Commission website in order to fetch the data for 2002, in many of the states, they will give you the data of 2003, which is not acceptable as per that form. Then, eventually, much of that Election Commission data also has to be browsed through hundreds of pages of PDF in order to find the name of maybe your parents or your grandparents. So that is where, for a normal, ordinary citizen, the burden of proof is now on the citizen to prove that, yes, I have been a part of that electoral process. So it is cumbersome, plain simple. But having said that, Election Commission says that it is required in order to weed out the unnecessary additions, in order to weed out the illegal immigrants, in order to weed out people who are not genuine citizens, and so on and so forth. Sanitization of electoral rolls is required. But if you think about it, around 65% of our population in the country is still rural. Think about the population or the proportion of the population which is still illiterate. For them to gather these evidences, to have those documentary proofs and keep them for more than 20 years, how difficult would that be? For the poorer population of the country, do you think that it would have been a priority that let's keep those voter ID cards of 2002? No. When you get the new voter ID card, you dispose of the older one. So this is where the exercise has been slightly tough. Yes, the exercise has got its own advantages. You get a much more accurate reading of the constituency, you get a much more updated constituency. But then you have the burden of proof whereby the marginalized, the poor, right, the oftentimes the vulnerable sections of the society, the old ones, the women, all of them, they oftentimes get marginalized and they get disenfranchised. So the article argues that look, an issue as sensitive as SIR, which can indicate or which can impact the electoral democracy and its health. Now, that issue was raised by the opposition parties to the Chief Justice, and eventually, you had the Chief Justice basically and the courts taking an inordinate amount of time before arriving at a decision. Now, when the courts take a lot of period of time, justice delayed is oftentimes justice denied. The article argues that look, if you will take, let's suppose, 5 years, 10 years before you come at a or a substantial amount of time before coming at a particular judgment, in that case, by that period of time, SIR would already have its effect of marginalizing many sections of population across the country. For them to get enfranchised again, it would be difficult. So it becomes wait accompli. The similar example has been cited of even Jammu and Kashmir. Now, the legality of Jammu, the article abrogation of Article 370 in Jammu and Kashmir had been raised in Supreme Court, but the matter was heard after a long period of time. By that period of time, the outcomes, the reality of it had become fait accompli. So that is where this judicial delay which is happening, that is something which can, in a way, empower the governmental actions or the executive actions. And the court is also being blamed in this particular article as being discriminatory in the sense that in certain SIR actions, for example, in the state of Bihar, you had the instance where timely interventions of the court through multiple different observations, orders, rulings, etc., made the court a part of that entire administrative execution process, whereby the court was not being seen as a judicial party, but as an administrative party. So, if the court can be proactive in these cases like Bihar, then why is it that the court is basically lacking that kind of proactiveness in the case of the other such issues? That is what raises the larger issue of judicial accountability, and the courts should be judicially accountable. That is what the entire article is about in a nutshell. Okay, I hope you understand this in detail. Now we will have the case of the uh, understanding of it with the help of the write up also. So, what is the context? First of all, 23 opposition parties wrote to the Chief Justice of India expressing concerns over the SIR process. The argument of the opposition parties: revision framework was exclusionary and burdensome. Poor, migrant, and marginalized citizens face the greatest risk of disenfranchisement. Supreme Court's refusal to intervene immediately weakened confidence in the constitutional safeguard. That is the broader context. Now, what was the court's response? Now, when we talk about the court's response, first of all, delayed judicial intervention. The delay in the judicial action basically makes the matter fait accompli, or makes the matter quite normative and acceptable. And this is not the only case. The article has also cited the cases associated with demonetization as well as the Jammu and Kashmir issue. Okay, Jammu and Kashmir, the abrogation of Article 370. Whatever, whether it is legal, whether it is constitutionally illegal, etc. These are issues which are time sensitive because these are issues which impact on a day to day basis. So that is why this should be taken a greatest attention for. Right? This should be paid a lot of attention for. Now, in this case, for example, in regions like Bihar, there is an active facilitation rather than judicial review. Rather than acting as an independent constitutional check, the court issued interim directions facilitating the SIR, effectively supervised aspects of the revision process as well. Now, this, if it is happening, let's suppose this is happening. First of all, this is not the work of the judiciary. If judiciary has taken this step, then why to limit itself only in Bihar? Assam has had a lot of exclusions. Bengal has had a lot of exclusions. Kerala, for that matter, has had a lot of exclusions. Tamil Nadu as well. So, why can't we have a broader intervention by the court or a broader ruling by the court in itself? Now, the article also argues that the court has taken a very narrow legal approach in this case. So basically, the court framed the entire argument in a binary of a technical dispute over election commission statutory powers. That is why, in the past few months, if you have been reading the newspapers or following the current affairs, every time you would have a discussion about Article 324. That is, whether it is in the power of election commission in order to do this or not. Now, if you restrict the entire exercise of being burdensome, etc., cumbersome, etc., to the powers of the election commission, then in a way, you are not doing justice to the marginalized section of the society, is what the article is arguing. So, it gave inadequate attention to the broader constitutional implication, deprivation of voting rights, and disproportionate impact on the vulnerable groups. If you only take a look at the power of the election commission definitely has the power. Election commission has been doing this exercise time and time again throughout our post independent history. But then, what are its implications? So the court is expected to take a wider worldview, is the argument. Now, this is where the article argues that basically it neglects the social realities of population in distant rural areas, population living on the marginalization of the society, their ability to participate in the process, all of that will be impacted. So that is the overall response of the court and its implications. Now, importance of these issues like SIR, issues like Jammu and Kashmir, they go far beyond the immediate documentary aspects out there. So, for example, SIR, if it leads to disenfranchisement, right? If someone is excluded, so let's suppose it becomes an exclusionary exercise. Now, in that particular case, the entire voter participation, India is an electoral democracy. Now, for an ordinary voter, let's suppose a poorer population or any part or any citizen, if you consider your entire participation in the democratic process, it is your act of voting. Other than that, your participation in the functioning of the government is very less. Your participation in terms of the pressure groups is also almost limited. So, your participation in the functioning of the democratic rights is absolutely limited. So that is where when certain activities become exclusionary, either issue directions to the Election Commission of India that make it more conducive for the population to be able to support or submit their documents, reduce the burden of documents from the citizens, or at least give certain directions. So here, look at the number of states where this exercise has already been carried out, and look at the number of population which it has impacted. Right. Same is the case with Jammu and Kashmir as well. It took a long period of time. Yes, the court finally had its say. But then the argument is that if the court had basically heard it early enough. Thereby, it would have provided a more constitutional clarity. And that is where even the executive gets a clearer path to move ahead. As long as the matter is sub judice, the matter is in doldrums, right? So that is why it needs to be heard. Certain issues need to be heard with greater urgency, is the argument. You have the case of certain prominent politicians, certain prominent individuals, be it from the ruling party, be it from the opposition party. You have the urgency of those matters which are heard even on vacation days, etc., etc. But these arguments oftentimes, or these cases oftentimes, get pushed to the brink. Now, that is what brings us to the importance of judicial accountability. Judicial actions that needs to be accountable, and that is where fair and open criticism of the court should be carried out and needs to be carried out, be it the Supreme Court, be it the High Court. And this is where we have seen in the past few months that the courts have been extremely touchy, right? Any particular argument that you present regarding the court becomes very touchy. For example, take the NCERT case, isn't it? Now, NCERT, whatever the changes they have been doing, the court is not impacted by it. The moment the NCERT textbook talked about the case of judiciary, every common citizen knows that judiciary is not the purest form of the institution that we have in our country. The NCERT book, the moment it touched upon it, contempt notices were issued, strict actions were taken from publishers to authors, everyone was made accountable. The curriculum of NCERT is being changed faster than a page for more than a couple of decades now. So, this judicial accountability is something which is very important. That is where the argument is that unless and until judiciary is truly accountable, oftentimes the delay in the judicial decisions, the silence of the judiciary in certain cases, basically ensures that it becomes an enabler to the executive action rather than a real check to the state power. Judiciary should serve as a check to the state power rather than an enabler to the state power, is the argument. What is your point of view in this? Do let me know in the comment section below and make some informed opinions over there, not the 9 p.m. debate shallow arguments. I hope and I know that you guys are mature enough. So, all of you have your own opinions where this is going forward, whether it is correct or incorrect. Either ways, make an informed argument. Now, the other article, the right path for India's nuclear power development. Now, this is a very interesting article. Many of you would not be aware about the realities of presented in the article as well, is something I'm sure. This is relevant for your GS paper 3. Now, what does this article talk about? So, nuclear power, nuclear energy is a very touchy issue for a country like India. India is energy starved, isn't it? We produce energy from non renewable, or rather fossil fuel, imported coal, imported oil, gas, etc. Nuclear power, as foreseen by the visionary Homi Jahangir Bhabha, nuclear power had the solution to India's energy security and India's energy independence. But with the rising nuclear China, India had to test its nuclear weapons. India did test its nuclear weapons in 1974. And it was at that point of time that international sanctions were imposed on India. Very crippling sanctions. Due to that, we had to suffer substantially in our own domestic development when it came to space sector, etc. Then, after the Pokhran 2 tests, which happened in the last part of the 20th century, there also another wave of crippling sanctions were imposed on India. So, in both of these cases, India was denied the technological sharing, the financial support, etc., which would enable India to become a truly independent nuclear power. So India had to move this way in a very hard path, right? We had to cover the harder path through it. That is basically we had to take a look into the self development of technology, alternate suppliers for the materials, for many of the core, for many of the enclosures. We had to secure our own supply chain network. It takes time to mature, for the maturing of the supply chain network, etc. But we have reached a very respectable limit. In what sense? That first of all, unit size of the Indian nuclear reactors, it started going up from 200 megawatts to 500 megawatts. And now we have gone up to 700 megawatts. Indigenous nuclear reactor. We are able to produce indigenous nuclear reactor of almost 700 megawatts. It is not the maximum out there in the world, but it is respectable and it shows real progress, right? You have the nuclear reactors produced by companies like Westinghouse, etc., which are much greater, much more powerful. The Korean giants, the French giants, they produce much powerful one of those. But yes, it is a step in the right direction. Mind you, just to give you the reference of this, thermal power is something that we have been producing for more than half a century now. There, our ability to produce the thermal power plants, indigenous thermal power plants, which is the boiler units, etc., which are not imported, that is also almost 660, 700, etc. in majority of the cases. 660 megawatts, etc. So that is where the development in nuclear power is quite sufficient. And most importantly, our own production of these reactors is very cost effective. It is very, very cost effective. In comparative scale, for example, we produce nuclear power plants at $1,700 per kilowatt. Just for reference, US produces nuclear reactor for $15,000 per kilowatt, almost more than 7 times or 8 times. So you can imagine that how Indian nuclear reactors are cost effective. But here, the government has basically given indications that it is going to import certain nuclear reactors, small modular reactors from certain foreign companies. That is where the article argues that rather than looking at those foreign companies, we should focus on our indigenous production because India's own energy market is huge. So our own suppliers will get a lot of scope to fill that gap in the energy market, and we won't be able to, or we won't have to depend on anyone. At the same time, if let's suppose a company A is producing five goods, five reactors, let's suppose overall cost is rupees 100, just as an example, per unit. Okay. The same company A, if it is going to produce 50 units, its price is going to come down further to, let's suppose, rupees 75 per unit. The economy of scale. And when this economy of scale is basically achieved, then you will have the technological progress as well. This is what China did. Now, the Atomic Energy Commission, etc., they also have the modular design for the 200 megawatt, the small modular reactor, which they are ready to share. This is where the private companies should come in. They should produce it. And mind you, we are in the age of AI, where one of the limitations that you would have rectified for AI is what? That AI consumes substantial amount of power, right? Energy which is consumed by AI is huge in terms of the data centers, their energy requirement, their cooling requirement, etc. Now, what if that power is supported by small modular reactors or nuclear power? That is what the Western countries are exploring. They don't have the expertise in very small modular reactors. We can develop that technology. And that is where we will solve multiple issues at the same time. We can dominate the AI data storage sector as well, produce that endless amount of power, ensure that we are carbon neutral at the same time, achieve the goal of 100 gigawatt of nuclear power generation by 2047 as well. So that is where it can be quite a substantially technological and technologically innovative step. Okay, this is what the article is about. Let's comprehend it in a point-wise manner. So here, when we talk about nuclear energy, relevance substantial in terms of self-sufficiency, isn't it? Now it will first of all reduce emissions substantially. Other than that, dependence on fossil fuels or reduce imports of fossil fuels as well. Other than that, it can fuel the AI surge through small modular reactors. That is where we have the Shantibil as well, through SMRs, small modular reactors also. And over a period of time, it will basically be cost effective, and it can, India, because it is very cost effective, can export to the world, isn't it? That is why it is very, very relevant. Now, importance of indigenous nuclear energy. India gradually increased the nuclear reactor capacity from 200 megawatts to 500 megawatts, and now 700 megawatts. Pressurized heavy water reactors is what we are able to produce. Four such 700 megawatt reactors are currently under construction in our country. Around 10 more have been planned. So think about it, that 14 are already in some process of production. We need to scale it up substantially. And it is cost effective. Per kilowatt, if you take a look at it, construction cost of Indian nuclear reactor around $1,700 per kilowatt. South Korea, around $2,200 per kilowatt. France, $5,500 per kilowatt. We still have a large land parcel in Jetapur in Maharashtra, where the French nuclear reactor is going to come up. And this is where the Indo French deal, which happened during Prime Minister's visit and the meet with Macron. Now, that is where India is said. It is not official, but it is said that it will import some of the reactors from France, and that is where the French have been interested in that region ever since the signing of the civil nuclear deal with US during Prime Minister Manmohan Singh's regime. Then United States, $15,000 per kilowatt. Now, the tech prowess of our country is also increasing. You would have seen that with the case of the fast breeder reactor and its commissioning in Kalpakkam. So the 500 megawatt prototype fast breeder reactor is nearing commercial commissioning after the technological challenges which were there. So India currently specializes in the pressurized heavy water reactors. Okay. However, going ahead, the fast breeder reactors, because they use the recycled fuel, that will also be in great demand. And light water reactors globally dominate, and they use enriched uranium. So this is where we can be the technological front runner across the world. Okay, we are able to produce the reactors at a much cheaper price because of the fact that in majority of our productional process, when we build something from scratch, our small scale industries, our ancillary industries are able to produce it at a much lower price, owing to the cost of labor force, the cost of transportation, etc., homologation cost which is required is much cheaper in India. So if you establish an entirely indigenous supply chain, the cost of production substantially drops. That is what India has been able to create. Okay. So it is about establishing those supply chains, establishing those industries which will produce it. right? For example, let's suppose I want to manufacture a car company. I will not be manufacturing everything in the car on my own, right? For example, the rubber coatings that are present, or the insulating coatings on the windows, I will need some other industry to produce it. So for that, initially I will have to handhold an industry to tell them how to produce it. How is it done in Germany, France, etc. But once they learn how to do it, production will always be cheaper in India, right? Similarly, someone will be handheld to manufacture the glass window of the car. Once they learn how to do it, production will be cheaper in India, right? So eventually my ability to produce the car will be at a much cheaper price as compared to, let's suppose, what a Korean giant produces, or let's suppose what a German brand produces. So that is the benefit of establishing your own domestic supply chain. This is what is known as the supply chain resilience. That is what is the overall agenda of all the governments across the world. Now, as we have already talked about, there is a substantial role to be played by the small modular reactors. Now, these small modular reactors are of great use when it comes to uh, AI, data centers, individual decentralized power generation, etc. And they require lower initial investment also, as compared to the large power plants, can supply dedicated power to AI data centers and offer flexible deployment, that is decentralized deployment. Okay, decentralized deployment. Now, Atomic Energy Commission is basically offering the 200 megawatt technology, indigenous technology. So private players should come up and avail that and be able to produce it. India right now is exploring, or has allowed the even the international participation, but international companies, they are not producing nuclear reactors of such low power factor. So as a consequence, what is the reality that we are staring at? Let's suppose a company like Toshiba produces a nuclear reactor, right, of 200 megawatt. It will be doing it for the first time. Now, without adequate safety parameters and safety advocacy backing it, it will deploy it to India. Is it something that we desire? If it has to be deployed for the first time, why not deploy indigenous technology rather than an imported tech? That is where we have to rely, we have to trust the indigenous technology, and we have to provide the financial incentive to do that. Only then in the long run we can attain the goal of 100 gigawatt nuclear power by 2047. Okay, and eventually we have to remember one thing: when it comes to nuclear power, it's all about safety. See, power generation is a dangerous thing. Every other day, you come across news stories of 20, 40 workers being killed in a thermal power plant. Disasters, they do happen. But when it comes to nuclear power, the potential goes thousandfold. The destruction potential crosses multiple generations as well. So that is where safety cannot be compromised under any circumstance. So we need to have very fine tuned regulations, checkings, inspections, and at the same time, we need to have the case of indigenous nuclear reactors meeting all the safe parameters. Then we can also be export oriented industry. Okay. I hope you have understood this topic in detail. Now, coming to the next article: can biogas aid India's energy security? Again, it's all about energy. GS paper 3. West Asia crisis has basically indicated. Yes, Harshvardhan, you had the nuclear disaster in Chernobyl that had happened. So, nuclear safety is important, right? But other than Chernobyl, which is and not Fukushima, which is the major nuclear disaster which US suffered, and when was it? Let us know in the comment section. Now, when it comes to the West Asian crisis, the ongoing US and Israeli war in Iran, it has basically impacted a lot of countries, particularly the case of the energy importing countries like India, etc. Now, India is a country which is importing around 85 to 86% of its fuel, right? Fossil fuels, gas, petrol, etc. So, for us, alternative fuel becomes very important. Now, this is where alternative fuel means what? Biogas, for example. There we can have the compressed biogas, which is mixed with CNG, and it can be used, right? CBG, compressed biogas, can be mixed with the piped gas supply as well and provide some amount of energy security in the households also. So, all of this can happen. In the similar lines, you have the ethanol blending program also. So, why is all of this happening? So that our overall dependence on the imported fuel reduces ever so slightly. Because biogas you can produce domestically, ethanol you can produce domestically, but crude oil, petroleum, natural gas you cannot produce domestically. So that is why biogas is being promoted. Okay. Now, what is a biogas? Absolute basics. So, biogas is basically produced through anaerobic digestion of organic matter, such as livestock manures, agricultural residues, food waste, municipal organic waste, etc., mainly consisting of methane, carbon dioxide, some other gases as well. Okay, so some of the other gases as well are basically used. So this is an overall biogas plant, a schematic of it that you would have seen in your school days as well. So here you basically have the mixing tank where kitchen waste, the cow dung, etc., all of that is put in. This is the inlet tank. This is the digester. And here, over a period of time, that anaerobic digestion takes place and gas is produced. Okay. So this gas is produced and that gas is rich in methane, CH4. Okay. And eventually, after complete digestion, decomposition, you have the outflow tank. This can be used as manure as well. Reduce our dependence on chemical fertilizers, make our farming more eco-friendly. Okay, so this is the overall production of biogas, right? The method of production of biogas. Now, this methane that is produced, this methane can directly be burnt, for example. If you burn that methane, it can boil water into steam. You can convert that steam into, or you can push that steam through a turbine, generate electricity, right? At a small scale, it can be used to generate electricity. It can be compressed and then mixed with the CNG that can be used as the fuel for your the auto rickshaws, the cabs, etc., the CNG vehicles that we have, right? So after purification and compression, it becomes compressed biogas, is chemically similar to CNG, is renewable and nearly carbon neutral, can be used for electricity generation, cooking, industrial heating, and transportation. So it is very, very beneficial. That is why the government over the past few years has been promoting the production of biogas, but it has not happened to a substantial level. So, what are some of the government initiatives? There are two prominent government initiatives other than the national policy on biogas. There are two prominent government initiatives. One is the Satat initiative, which was established or which was initiated in 2018. Other is the Gobardhan program. So the Satat initiative established in 2018 is basically sustainable alternative towards affordable transportation. Target establish 5,000 decentralized compressed biogas plants across the entirety of the country. As of June 3, 2026, only 132 plants had become operational, which means there is substantial implementation challenge. Not even 10% has been achieved. Right? Now, what was the other initiative? Gobardhan scheme. Convert agricultural and organic waste which the farmers dispose of into wealth generation as an energy source. So grants up to 50 lakh per district for community biogas plants, rupees 564 crore for procurement and biomass procurement and collection machinery. Then rupees 994 crore for gas pipeline connectivity to link CBG plants with the city gas distribution network. Substantial amount of money, but here also implementation challenges prevail. So, what are these challenges? The infrastructure, pipeline, procurement system is not very well developed. For example, we have been seeing, and majority of population, particularly on social media, what is the argument? That E20 petrol is providing less mileage, but why is the price same? Right? The price is high because for the procurement of, let's suppose, maize, which is used for ethanol production, that logistics cost is high. The production is not happening at scale. So that is why the overall price parameter is high. So if you improve the infrastructure, procurement infrastructure, pipeline infrastructure, the price tends to reduce. Private sector participation is required to be able to scale it up. Government sector can only have so much amount of investment, so that private sector participation is not happening. Difficulty in accessing affordable credit, right, for a decentralized production. High capital cost of setting up of a biogas plant, so we need to have an alternative and a cheaper method of a cheaper biogas plant to be generated. Weak supply chains for biomass collection in the rural areas. That biomass, the cow dung, the manure, etc., that is not being collected in an organized, effective, cooperative manner. If that is sorted, then your overall supply cost in itself will reduce. Financial incentives remain insufficient to make the project commercially attractive. More investment from the side of the government is also required. Overall, across the world, alternative fuel is something which has been explored, which is being explored since the 1990s and the 1980s itself. Germany, for example, explored the idea of the alternative fuel way back in the 1990s and then again in the 2000s. Now, here, the idea, because every country is not blessed with fossil fuel, unless and until you are a Nordic country, a Norway, or let's suppose a Sweden, or let's suppose you are not a country of the Middle East. You have to import that fuel, and importing that fuel means global supply shocks like the Iran war, Ukraine war, etc., will always bring about uncertainty in your energy production. So when a country like Germany does it, so what Germany did, it basically provided some amount of incentives for alternative fuel, right? Now, what was the experience of it? People started growing crops like maize, because from maize, alternative fuel could be generated at a much cheaper price, right? So the farmers had a greater incentive. Now, the long term outcome was that maize started replacing your food grains, food crops, and that endangers your overall food security. So that is when Germany eventually had to make a policy that for production of alternative fuel, we will not use food products or the food crops at all. Now, what is the experience in India? India is not very different. India, why are we trying to produce the alternative fuel? To save foreign exchange when it comes to import of petroleum, natural gas, etc. That is why ethanol blending, etc., is being done. Now, from FY 2022 to FY 25, basically what is being observed is that overall maize production has been increasing. Area under maize has been increasing. Whereas areas under pulses, then millets, or rather oil seeds, they have remained approximately consistent. Why am I talking about pulses and oil seeds? Wheat also, the area under coverage or area under acreage is almost consistent. But I have not talked about wheat, I have talked about pulses and oil seeds. because India imports pulses and oil seeds and edible oil, right? So for us, there also we are giving out foreign exchange. So that is why when we produce alternative fuel, now thereby the one of the cheapest that you get is from the broken rice straws. Then you have the sugarcane also. So that is why it will always have an impact on the food production as well. So we need to establish those supply chains, and then only we can end up meeting the energy security. Energy resilience and alternative fuel is very important as we move ahead with the passage of time. That is why the government has made up plans for the mixing of this biogas in the pipe natural gas, starting with 1%, eventually reaching 5%. That is in line with the global standards also. But then for that, you need the proper pipeline, proper collection disposal facilities, and a very resilient supply chain network, which is required. Okay. Now, discuss the role of alternative fuel for energy scarce country like India. What should be the way ahead in this area? Now, in this kind of an answer for the intro, talk about India's imports. Okay. India's imports. You can talk about that how India is importing the majority of its energy requirements from Middle East. Give the proportion 85% to 88%. Then in the body portion, talk about the case that rising economy is growing year after year, rising economy and rising population. Because of both of them, the energy demand in the coming decade is going to go up. Energy demand is going to go up rapidly. Now, in order to make it resilient from global supply shocks, we need to be establishing our own alternative tech as well. So, alternative fuel is required. So, what you have done is that you have provided to the evaluator the background information about the role of alternative fuel for energy scarce country. Okay, this is the first part or the first half of your answer. Now after this you basically talk about the case that when we talk about the alternate fuel and a country like India, there you start with the case of the various alternative fuel, for example biogas, compressed biogas. You talk about the case of ethanol, all of those. Okay. Thereafter, you talk about the alternative, different types of generations of ethanol, etc. Biofuel, you can talk about. Talk about the government initiatives. Then, in the way ahead, the challenges that we have discussed. So just convert them. Where we have said poor infrastructure, better infrastructure is required, poor supply chain, better supply chain needs to be established. All of that needs to be talked about. And then conclusion, talk about 2047, uh, the aim of 2047. Okay, energy security and Viksit Bharat. For that, we need the a better and a resilient network. Okay. Now, what is the India Australia uranium supplies agreement? Now, uranium supply India during Prime Minister's visit. Now, this is relevant for your GS paper too. During the Prime Minister's visit, India secured the supply of uranium from Australia. Now, Australia has already been doing some amount of that supply to uranium supply to India, but in limited measures, not in very large measures. Now, we have basically secured an agreement, what is being seen as the administrative arrangement. It is termed as the administrative arrangement. Now, in that case, the bulk transfer will happen. Till now, basically, 300 tons, 300 tons of uranium have been exported to India since 2018. But then more will be done now. Okay. So this is a game changer. This will be done under IEA, the energy safeguards of IEA, right? IAEA, and basically it will be for civilian requirements, energy security, because right now, post the Iran crisis, every country is seeking to diversify the energy security overall. So finalization of the administrative arrangements removes the remaining procedural hurdles for the uranium trade. It allows Australian uranium mining companies to sign commercial contracts with the Indian entities. So, participation of Indian private sector companies and joint ventures will also be allowed under the case of the uranium procurement. Okay, so this is a more decentralized, a more organized way of trade which will happen. So, the trade volume of uranium will go ahead. And this is basically where the India's recent the nuclear mission and the case of increased prominence to be given to nuclear energy will come to fruition. Strategic relevance of nuclear energy we have discussed in the second article itself, so that remains consistent in this article also. But Australia overall has a substantial amount of uranium reserves, right? One fourth of world's known uranium reserves, right? Largest uranium producers and exporters. Which are the other two countries which dominate the trade of uranium in the world? One in Asia, one in North America. Let me know in the comment section. Traditionally, Australia has maintained a strict policy of the case of exporting uranium only to countries with strong non proliferation commitment. India has basically indicated a very strong non proliferation record as well. So that is where India does have a very good record. But overall, Australia has been exporting it to countries like the US, the countries like Japan, South Korea, France, UK, Germany, Belgium, Finland, Sweden, in all these countries. And India is a kind of an outlier in this particular regard. Okay. So that is basically because of India's very strong records in that. Overall, the evolution that you will observe in the case of Australian and the Indian nuclear arrangement or agreement, you'll find that the negotiations have been happening for almost 2 decades. Okay. And there have been progressive developments in the case. So, 2009, Prime Minister Kevin Rudd, and it all started to happen and it all started to unfold post the 2008 and 9, the deal, civil nuclear deal with US. Okay. That is why it was very important. Okay. Now, here basically you will observe that 2014 you had the Australia, India, they signed the nuclear cooperation agreement. Then 2015 agreement entered into the force. 2018 Australia has exported from 2018 almost 300 tons of uranium, and now administrative arrangements will carry this even further. Okay. Right. So that is the detail associated with the case of the nuclear arrangement with Australia. Himani Prajapati, elevate batch student. There have been no. So see, Indian geography, the classes are done, right? Physical geography will resume later. So that is where I would suggest from today you can attend the NCERT classes where we are covering the physical geography. Indian geography, the batch has been completed and the portion has also been completed thereby. Okay. Right now, so that is where you basically have uh, a different batch that is economy, which is going on, Himani, if you have followed what has been taught in the class. So you can follow the NCRT sessions from today for physical geography or eventually wait for it a couple of months down the line. Now, coming to the next article, for Iran, Hormuz is the key to deterrence and dominance in Persian countries, Persian Gulf. So this is relevant for your GS paper too. Now, what is the article about? So here, next country is Canada and Namibia. I had asked one in North America, one in Asia. Right, Namibia is not in Asia. In terms of the nuclear exports, I'm talking about, not in terms of reserves. Okay. Now, here, the Strait of Hormuz has again basically come to a boil. And this is where the US is saying that we are holding it hostage. Then Iran is saying that we will charge a toll. Yesterday, Mr. Trump has said that basically US will start charging a toll. So, Strait Hormuz is a dicey agenda. After arriving at a temporary memorandum of understanding on June 17th, whereby US was supposed to lift sanctions on Iran, on Iranian oil, on Iranian exports, again these attacks have been reinitiated by the Iranian side as well. US has bombed more than 100 sites in Iran. So why is Iran resuming this? Because primarily Iran doesn't trust the goodwill of United States anymore. After all, US completely reneged from its understanding of the 2015 JCPOA. Also, Iran knows that Strait of Hormuz is its only negotiating factor. After all, the Strait of Hormuz, basically, you will have in 2025 20 million barrels of oil passed through the strait in a day, along with more than 112 billion cubic meters of LNG. Right? It handled one third of global seaborne urea trade for agriculture, one third of seaborne ammonia trade, 40% of sulfur exports, together counting for 30% of the global fertilizer export. So, Strait of Hormuz, which you can see in the background image, is very, very important. Now, here the US forces basically have been saying that from the Omani coast, we will secure a kind of a passage. Iran knows that if US does so, then basically its negotiating chip will go and maybe US can reimpose its sanctions. That is why Iran is holding the whole region hostage in order to extract as much as it can from the US. Because US and Israel, when they entered into this battle, they had certain agendas. The overthrow of the regime, that is the regime change, the Iranian supported militias uh, from the Houthis to the Hezbollah, all of that should be uprooted, demilitarization of Iran, and so on and so forth. None of that has happened. So Iran knows it can sustain itself. And Iran is claiming a kind of a strategic victory as well. So that is why it is basically the argument of the article that Iran is extending this kind of a conflict phase because the Hamas, the Hezbollah, the Houthis, the Hashad, all of them, they continue to be supported by Iran. US is not even talking about it. In the peace deal, there is no mention about it. So Iran wants to maintain the momentum. Iran wants to maintain its strategic relevance. Having said that, the flip side is also one. The flip side is that basically this is the only card that Iran has got left to play. And this has impacted the world. Once the world gets tired of this uncertainty around Strait of Hormuz, imagine if other countries like Egypt, etc., they also start charging a toll. Then the global backlash will be huge. After all, Iran has not paid to construct Strait of Hormuz. Egypt has paid to construct the Suez Canal. So if Egypt also starts charging a fee, Indonesia also starts charging a fee for Strait of Malacca, global backlash will be so huge that this trump card of Iran will be destroyed once and forever. And that is where, in the long run, the Iranian state will suffer a substantial setback. That is where the way forward for Iran would be to have a constructive dialogue with the global partners and the global forces, gain global goodwill, and ensure that US is basically held true to its words. Okay. Now, some of the articles relevant for your prelims. First of all, retail inflation climbs past the RBI target of 4%. It has climbed to around 4.4%. And the CPI, basically, the CPI has increased. And that CPI has increased in terms of food inflation, which is amongst the highest in the new series of CPI. That food inflation has reached 5.05%, right? The transportation, logistics or transportations. So there, the inflation has been 4.3%. This is owing to the fuel prices. Fuel prices have increased owing to the Iran crisis. Food inflation due to uneven monsoon. Okay, uneven monsoons. So that is why the supply chain has been impacted. Then also the case of fertilizer uncertainty due to the Iran war. Fertilizer supply has been short. Okay. Now, here basically, this is the overall implication. So, food inflation has been much higher, okay, in the month of June as compared to May. So, combined and food inflation, if you will observe, then it has been maximum in the case of Andhra Pradesh. Andhra Pradesh has indicated the maximum food inflation of around combined food price inflation of around 8.18%, and minimal has been in the case of Madhya Pradesh. Okay. Now, India and Japan, they have been reviewing their ties and prepare the ground for the 2+2 dialogue. So, basically, in terms of defense, cybersecurity, maritime security, etc., India and Japan are seeking greater amount of cooperation. Mind you, in recent weeks, in the past week, China and Russia, for the first time, conducted a maritime exercise of coordination of submarine forces, which is very rare. Countries basically, when they carry out maritime security exercises, they generally have the entire fleet coordinating with each other, but submarines talking to each other is a rare phenomena, which indicates a greater joint operational preparedness. This is where Japan has been exploring the ties, maritime exercises, and security with India. We have discussed previously how Japan has signed a deal for the development of a new generation unicorn, that is the naval antenna, to reduce the radar signature and to improve the stealth aspect of our country. So, defense engagements, military to military exchanges, cooperation between the two countries' joint headquarters, maritime control, advanced technologies, including the eighth defense policy discussion, which will happen, capacity building, etc. And the 2+2 is of defense minister plus the foreign minister. Okay, defense minister plus the foreign minister. That agreement or that discussion will happen. All Ladakh districts to get autonomous hill councils in a sui generis model. That is, sui generis means something which is very unique only to Ladakh. Under Article 371 of the Constitution, which provides for the special status provisions, that is where the Ladakh Autonomous Hill Development Council Act will be extended to all the districts in the region. So thereby you will have the tehsils which have been declared. The smaller blocks have been declared. So earlier Ladakh only had two districts of Leh and Kargil. Five new districts, that is Sham, Nubra, Changthang, Zanskar, and Dras. They were notified in April. 17 additional tehsils, and now Ladakh has around 32 tehsils. So, thereby, a greater decentralization can happen, and that is where four new divisions under Public Health Engineering and Flood Control Department, four new divisions under PWD, Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana, etc., are being established. So these are the newer districts, the newer tehsils, which will also save the or increase the administrative efficiency. Many of the times in the cases where you had the administrative officials required to travel almost 300 kilometers from one tehsil to another. So that was the broader division. Now it has been done in a better manner. Okay. Trade deficit jumps fourfold in June due to surging imports. So exports have surged, but the imports have surged much higher. So here, trade deficit grew to around $15 billion in June 2026. Okay. So here, basically, you have the case of overall exports grew 9.5% to 73 billion. Imports, on the other hand, grew 27% to around 88 billion. Okay. So exports have basically become around 73 billion, right? You observe this. Exports have increased, but imports have increased massively. So that is why the trade deficit has substantially increased year on year as compared to last year. Now, where is that import increasing? The merchandise imports have increased, electronic imports, electronic product imports have also increased, and the price at which you are importing fuel, that has also increased. Right? So merchandise export increased 31% to $70 billion as compared to exports. Exports grew at a much slower rate. And overall, you also had the case where the services exports have increased, but the services imports have also increased. Right? It is largely because of the electronic goods, oil imports. These have been increasing. Why electronic goods? In order to manufacture machinery as well. Okay. Couple of articles for from your PIB. Ministry of Information and Technology, Electronics and Information Technology, and Drone Federation of India, they have launched the program NIDAR 2.0. What is that? It challenges students to build smarter drones powered by an Indian made chip. This is relevant for your prelims. Indian made chip here. Okay. That becomes very important. Price pool is also decided and has been increased, but that is not important for your exam. Now, here, drone's brain is to be run on the Vega processor. What is the Vega processor? We will talk about it. But here, NIDAR first 1.0 was launched in March 2025, NIDAR 2.0 in July 2026. So it focuses from shifts the focus from conventional airframes to autonomous systems, indigenous avionics, and core drone components. Track 1 and track 2 are the two parts of NIDAR. So, drone innovation, students to build fully autonomous drones for disaster relief, autonomous swarm drones that can locate survivors and deliver medical parcels in disaster zone without any external communication, because we have seen in areas like Wayanad, in areas of flood prone regions like Assam, that communication becomes a challenge. So swarm drones, which can basically deliver the package and the medical rescue as well. So GPS denied drone that can navigate indoor space for even industrial inspection. Obviously, it will have its military implication as well. Then track 2, component innovation to develop indigenous flight controller and autopilot built around the Vega processor using indigenous components. The top 100 teams will receive the Vega component for development. What is Vega? The Vega processor is a family of microprocessor developed by CDAC under MIT's microprocessor development program. It is based on RISC-V architecture, right? So here, basically, it is as a part of the SWAYAM program as well. which was approved, Swayan program as well. Swayan program approved by METI in July 2022 basically talks about building and training a very skilled workforce needed for India's drone sector. Hub and spoke model of 30 premier institutions from CDAP to IITs to the triple ITs, IISc, etc., across the themes of aeromechanics, drone electronics, algorithms, etc. Then, Lokayan 26, Indian naval ship Sudarshini has reached Boston as a part of the global or as a part of a kind of a fleet exercise that is the Sail Fourth to 50 celebration in New York to celebrate the 250 years of US independence. And now it has arrived at basically Boston. So this is the naval ship INS Sudarshini. It is a training naval ship, right? Training ship now, why it is important? It indicates the resilience and the circumglobal potential of the Indian naval force as well, and it can be relevant for your prelims. Okay, that brings us to the end of the discussion for the day. I hope the discussion was helpful and fruitful for you. If you have liked it, put that in the comment section. And don't forget to click on the like, share, and the subscribe button. See you guys tonight at 7 p.m. for the basic of NCRTs, where we will be talking about the Big Bang Theory and the formation of planet Earth as well. Take care. Goodbye.